Hello and welcome to Real Menopause Talk. My guests today are Dr. Andie Siggers and Carol Milliner. They are two of the foursome who make up Change the Change. Change the Change takes the complex process of menopause and delivers knowledge and understanding to women in how to manage this time in their lives. Carol heads up mindset and lifestyle coaching. Francesca takes care of how and what to eat. Karen looks after movement and fitness. And Dr. Andie Siggers runs both the functional medicine side and addresses HRT. They talk to us here about their personal experiences, what they're doing with Change the Change, and Dr. Andie Siggers gives us an insight into how to approach your GP about menopause successfully. Andie and Carol, lovely to meet you both. Would you like to start?
Carol, do you want to start?
Yep, I'll head off. Well, I'm the health and lifestyle coach at Change the Change, and I specialise in sort of the mindset and habits area of the course, helping people sort of look at ways they can make sort of powerful changes in their lives. We've sort of evolved the course, become apparent that the mindset bit just sits above everything that we look at and sort of pulls it all together. So by addressing the mindset, it helps people get themselves in the right place to look at their own menopause and their own lifestyle. So it's been a brilliant sort of being part of that and seeing how it all fits in. But background, years ago, I was in the city working in insurance. It was a very sort of high stress job. Left that when I wanted to have children and moved to Devon, and have very much adopted a much slower pace of life since then. So, yep, we're based down in Devon now. I've got two children, both now teenagers, which adds new and interesting stress with GCSEs. Yes. And their slightly chaotic hormones balanced with my slightly chaotic hormones. It could be interesting at times.
I also have one teenager and one 10-year-old. So yes, GCSEs, also hormones. So I understand. Andie, How about you?
I used to live in Devon, which is how Carol and I first met. And actually now live on the south coast in Poole in Dorset with my family, with two teenagers. And I'm a GP originally, so I've been a GP for 15, 20 years or so, and then sort of expanded out and went over to the States to study what's called functional medicine, which looks at the underlying cause of health problems, and just found the hormonal part of that really interesting. My own mother had a very difficult menopause. She had a surgical menopause. So I always assumed that when I got there, it would be awful because, you sort of assume that if your mum had a difficult time, you probably would. And I used to get PMT, so I assumed it. So I sort of needed to feel prepared, really. And then somebody, a very wise old GP, once said to me, your patients grow with you. And it's actually a really, really true thing that, it doesn't feel very long ago that most of my patients seem to have small children. And now most of my patients seem to be menopausal, which I think says more about me getting older. So since the last few years, I've got a clinic up here doing root cause health and also menopausal health. And then Carol was up visiting and we went for a run. We've done lots of running together over the years and we were running along the beach. And Carol said, oh, there should be more information about this out there. We need the help. And we just said, well, why don't we create something? That was the beginning of it. I think since then, the amount of information available has spiraled. There is huge amounts of information out there now about HRT and about menopause and about all the lifestyle things you can do to help with menopause. But what we're trying to offer is slightly different in that it's about all those things, but it's also about the support because sometimes the changes that may need to take place, the acceptance of what's happening to you, the mountain of information about what you could do or what friends say they did and this worked, but then you try it and it doesn't work, it can just become a bit of a minefield. So we want to try and create a sort of supportive community to be able to help in this stage.
I've very much found that the community side is incredibly important, and I know others have as well. So even telling our stories and sharing our experiences of peri to post-menopause is a massive support, certainly for our listeners. Whereabouts are both of you in terms of perimenopause, menopause? Carol?
Well, I'm smack bang in the perimenopause phase. And I mean, this was the sort of conversation that Andie was mentioning that we had when we were running, because what I hadn't realised was all the small symptoms that you're not really aware of, which sort of give you the indication that you're in perimenopause. Because I've never had a hot flush. I have the odd sort of night sweat, but then I've had those since my 20s. So if I have one of those, I don't necessarily associate it with menopause. So I haven't had a hot flush, and my periods have always been slightly erratic, so I didn't really gain anything from that. But it was starting to get sort of thinning hair, and I've always had really thick hair, and it was getting a bit sort of thin around the top. I had a spate of labyrinthitis, so I've got sort of sudden onset sort of vertigo, and had a week where I couldn't do anything because I was just so dizzy. And that dizziness has kind of continued through the next couple of years. And then a bit of sort of tinnitus in my ears, then a little bit of anxiety where situations that would normally have not have fazed me, you suddenly realise you're getting slightly anxious about. And it all sort of slowly sort of built up. And it was just talking to Andie and having these sort of conversations, I realised that these were classic perimenopause symptoms. And then when you start looking at them, you've got these, and they say 37, and I think some places even say now up 70 symptoms of menopause, perimenopause. So it's sort of they're lots in there, and they're not all the hot flushes. So that was sort of where I am, experiencing various different sort of symptoms, managing most of them, I think, just through sort of lifestyle and diet, which really does help, and just sort of seeing how the journey goes.
And Andie, whereabouts are you?
So not dissimilar. I similarly have had probably 3 hot flushes in my life, but I've found the absolutely overwhelming fatigue has been the bit that's poleaxed me. And Carol and I have run ultramarathons together, and I don't do getting so fatigued I can't get out. And it's that comes as quite a shock to the system. And I think that anxiety that's a little bit different to the anxiety that I maybe had before. I've always been that person in the family who, I'm only okay as long as once I've worked out that everyone else is okay. I think that's probably most of us mums. But that waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning, completely unable to get back to sleep, even though you're exhausted, and the thing that's keeping you awake is tiny. Yes, it's an anxiety thing, but it's not a big issue. It's just a little thing, and it just keeps you awake for 3 hours. And the number of nights I've ended up coming downstairs and sitting on the sofa cuddling the dog is ridiculous. And I know it's hormonal. It's this life stage, and I think there is a lot that helps with that makes a difference with that. I think I have to be honest and say that doing the job that I do, doing the self-care thing is difficult. There's a time thing, and what we notice from the course, this is a time poor stage of life. Okay, we know that most women look after children, if you choose to have children or can have children, for 18 years. But actually, we also tend to look after a dependent older relative for 17 years. This stage in life, quite often you do both. Okay, and our generation, we don't want to slow down. We still want to do everything else. We still want to have a life. And we shouldn't forget that we've also been dealing with a pandemic. And that adds to the challenges and that sense of instability that, none of us really know what's going to happen next week. And you don't really feel like you can book a holiday to look forward to because you might get there and it's cancelled. So yeah, that's where I'm at with it, is on the journey, very much going through it, and certainly nowhere near the other side yet.
I can relate to the 3 o'clock in the morning thing. I had exactly that last night. Knew there was nothing I could do about it. Was determined to go back to sleep so I could approach it all this morning, and still, lying there. I didn't realise that was hormonal.
It is different for different people, but for an awful lot of us, what happens is you go to bed completely shattered, and our cortisol, so our stress hormone that comes from the adrenal gland, has dropped right down because you've run out of it in the day. And then when you're at this stage of life and when you've got lots going on, it starts to rise, and when it then rises up is at about 4. And so then you wake up, and even though you're still exhausted, your brain's awake because the stress hormone has kicked in.
Given that we're onto cortisol, are you able to give us a brief overview of the hormones that are in play, particularly during perimenopause, menopause?
Absolutely. For the vast majority of us, before we hit perimenopause, we have some sort of cycle. It might be a bit irregular, it might be variable, it might be completely predictable because you're on the pill, but there is some sort of cycle. And in that cycle, you'll have times of the month when you feel strongest, and times of the month when you bleed, and times of the month when you might be a bit tearful. And so it's not always great, but there's usually some degree of predictability. Okay. After the menopause, you have very low levels of estrogen, progesterone, usually testosterone, and high levels of the brain hormones that are telling your ovaries to release. Your ovaries are now ignoring them. And that's fairly constant too. And a lot of people are fine when they get to that stage. Not everybody, but a lot of people are. The bit in between, the perimenopause, is basically a roller coaster. Okay, so one day you've got high hormones, next day you've got low hormones, one day you've got a heavy period, next month you miss it completely. One day you're crying at everything, the next day you're shouting at everybody, the next day you're thinking, what in the world was all that about? And you go back to feeling like your usual capable self. And those phases can last a day, a month, a year even. So it's this variability that's so difficult to handle that I think is why we struggle quite so much, because you think, I can't predict how I'm going to feel. That's partly why we often don't do blood tests to prove the perimenopause unless you're under 45, because it's all very well me saying a snapshot, your estrogen was fine on Tuesday, but it might not be fine on Saturday because of the fact that it changes so much. And us women, we're pretty capable, us women. And so we're pretty good with high hormones and we're pretty good with low hormones. It's just this massive swing between the two that sends most of us into some sort of spin, be that physically, emotionally, or both. Not everyone has testosterone particularly affected because you get some of your testosterone from your ovaries and some of your testosterone from other glands. But if you have a surgical menopause, so if you've had surgery that means that's put you into a very quick menopause, then you lose half of your testosterone, whatever else is going on. And you lose the vast majority of your estrogen very suddenly, which is why that group of ladies can quite often have far worse symptoms and very quickly. Our body says, I don't particularly like this. And so it does things to try to boost your hormones a bit. So it does helpful things like one place you can get estrogen from is fat tissue. So, if we make a bit more fat tissue, well, then we can have a bit more estrogen. Isn't that brilliant? And so lo and behold, here we all are struggling with that little tire around the middle that we never used to have because our body's trying to look after us.
Carol, you said that food and lifestyle had really helped you or is really helping you through the perimenopause.
We've got a nutritionist, Francesca, who's on the call, and she put together a specific food plan which helps this life stage. But it's all about balancing your blood sugar, stopping those sort of crashes, your insulin resistance changes at this life stage. So we're more prone to peaks and troughs there. So we're trying to eat in a much more insulin balancing way. And that's been the thing that I've sort of probably learned most over the last couple of years is eating with bigger gaps between my meals. I'm a terrible snacker. I like my breakfast and then I tend to snack during the day if I'm left to my own devices and not really have meals. They don't really interest me, but I'd much prefer to just sort of graze my way through the day. And that doesn't really help my blood sugar and also doesn't necessarily mean I'm getting all the nutrients that I need. So I've had to re-educate myself. I always thought I ate sort of fairly healthily, even if I was snacking. Now I've tried to overhaul that and try and have a big gap between my evening meal and my first meal of the day. So I've got sort of at least 14 hours between that sort of last meal and your first meal of the day to give your body a nice break. Mm-hmm. And then have a sort of a nice healthy breakfast with sort of all your sort of proteins and fats and things included, and then allow another 4 hours before having lunch and then another big gap to dinner. So it's been quite a big change, but that's sort of one of the things we advocate on the course, and that's the sort of the way the food plan goes. Again, it's eating a rainbow, it's eating cold foods, it's avoiding the processed food. It's all the stuff we know, mm-hmm. but it's amazing how well it actually works if you follow it. That's Fran's area of the course, and she goes into real depth about why that sort of way of eating really supports this life stage. I'm more about prioritising yourself. As Andie mentioned earlier, this stage of life is so busy. We're mums, career women, looking after elderly relatives. We come bottom. It can feel like a real luxury indulgence, but if we can just make a little bit of time for ourselves, it doesn't have to be hours. It's just a few minutes every day just to do a bit of yoga, get outside, really makes a big difference to our overall mental health. So that's sort of where I'm at, is just trying to put ourselves first for once and make sure that we look after ourselves. I mean, it's like that sort of thing that they say on the aeroplane, you have to put on your own oxygen mask before you put on other people's. And that's because if you're run down, you can't look after everybody properly. And when we're looking after all these extra people, we make sure we're in the right place to look after them.
Mindset and mental health feels even more important now post-pandemic than perhaps it was even before. Andie, can I ask you, as a GP, there seem to be a wide range of experiences of women. Sometimes surgeries are fortunate enough to have a menopause specialist. Sometimes the knowledge is lacking there. Is there anything that can be done to make your life easier in terms of being able to support women during the menopause?
When all the research came out all those years ago that hit the headlines saying that HRT was the worst thing in the world and nobody should be on it, that was roughly when I was training. And so at that time, nobody was teaching about the menopause because they were basically saying, don't touch this with a barge pole. And so you then come through and it is a gap in knowledge because nobody was touching it. Then research moves on, as is always the case, and we start to get more research comes through and we start to understand better, and we start to understand that actually if you use the right sort of hormones, if you use the hormones that are the same as the ones that you're missing, so HRT standing for hormone replacement therapy, some of the older HRTs were a bit like your own hormone replacement therapy. And actually, if you stick with the hormones that you're missing, the risks are far, far lower. Okay. And the risks are far lower than if you drink too much alcohol, don't do any exercise, or don't eat well. And in my experience, if you're feeling awful and menopausal, that's not a time when it's very easy to make yourself eat well and get exercise because you're feeling rubbish. So actually, if you want to lower your risks, you need to manage your symptoms to then be able to look after yourself. So there has been a huge improvement in recent years with menopause training. So I think the majority of surgeries now, there is at least somebody who has done menopause training. Okay. Usually receptionists will know who. Receptionists usually are quite good at knowing which GPs have got which interests. This is definitely not always the case, but in the main, it's women because women tend to see women. And, I don't see that much in the way of men's health. For the similar reason, men go to see men. But again, that is a generalization, so I'm certainly not saying it's always like that. There is some very good menopause training out there now that we as doctors have good access to, but I totally see that is very variable. The thing that I think is the most difficult thing is that doing a proper menopause consultation with a new lady who is got menopausal symptoms, we get 10 minutes in general practice. I have never done that in 10 minutes, okay? Because you're talking about a wide range of symptoms, a wide range of options, a big discussion that needs to happen about pros and cons. And we are simply ridiculously time short and want to give it the half an hour that it really needs, but actually have the 10 minutes. So sometimes I think people can end up feeling rushed, but I don't think that's ever meant to be the case. It's just we're trying to cover so much. Mm-hmm. So what can be helpful is getting information through first. For example, you can share some information or make it clear right at the beginning. I've seen the Davina TV program. I've been on this app. I've been on this course. Whatever it is, if you make the GP realize that you are coming into this with a level of knowledge already, then it can frame, you can say the question, tell me what your menopausal symptoms are, rather than having to go through them one at a time. But I do think the world is changing. I think how we looked after menopause 5 years ago in comparison to now is very different. And I suspect in another 5 years' time, it will be very different again. There is a huge desire for this to be better looked after. If we're looking at the NHS budget, well, if we make this age of women well, then it has knock-on effects of reducing risk of heart attacks, brain health improvements. So from the point of view of NHS budget, it's in everyone's best interest to look after us women as we go through this and reduce our future risks.
Change the Change looks after all aspects of women's health, from movement to nutrition, lifestyle, and the medical side. HRT suits some people, but not others. So how do you go about deciphering it for the women who come to you?
So the course is primarily from the medical side, is about education, okay? Right. Because it is about supporting people as they make their decisions. So you put into place the nutrition stuff, the movement stuff, you understand why you're doing this, because it's much easier to motivate yourself to do something if you know why you're bothering, okay? You put in place Carol's amazing mindset stuff, and then you work out what you're left with. And some people at that point feel fine. They may not feel fine for 5 years, but they certainly feel fine, so they don't need to do anything else. Other people still have significant symptoms or maybe have significant worries. So I do lots of talk about the HRT side of things, but also expand on that a bit. So we break it up into what we call 5 pillars, which we call FRESH, okay, which is food, relaxation, exercise, sex and sleep, and habits and HRT, okay? And so things like how the menopause affects your sex life, for example, and what you could do about that, and why is it suddenly different to how it used to be? They're things that are quite difficult to talk to your friends about. They're quite difficult to be open about. There is lots of information out there, but as we say, it can be quite confusing. From the point of view of the HRT, there is this sort of feeling out there, the impression I get is that people think of it as a light switch. You're on HRT or you're off HRT. End of. But actually, it's much more complicated than that. There's lots of different sorts of HRT, formulations, delivery methods, supply problems. And some people get away with a low dose, some people need a high dose. Why is that? And so there is an element of understanding what you need and why you need it. And then you can make that decision with a clear mind. And I think the other message I tried to get across is that sense that no decision needs to be permanent. I see so many ladies who are really worried about going on HRT. But it's funny, if you say, well, go on it, if in 6 weeks' time you don't like it, come off it again. And you think, oh yeah, I could. And it sounds like such an obvious thing. But actually, I found that, that you just think it is a big decision. Mm-hmm. But actually, if you make it into a littler decision and say, what if I tried it for a few weeks? Then it might just feel a bit easier.
Carol, have you got anything that you would like to add to that?
The whole idea with this course is we want to cover everything so that there are, as you say, there's some people who can't go on HRT, and Andie covers that in her talk, which is really why this course feels like the right thing. We've got somebody medical on there, but we've also got all the other disciplines covered as well. So we tend to put HRT at the end of the course, so we cover all the other things first. If you sort out your diet, you get some relaxation in, you get the right type of exercise, you improve your sleep, change your mindset and sort of lifestyle as a whole, you can see an amazing improvement in your sort of symptoms. So it may be that you come out at the end of it going, well, actually, I don't feel like I need HRT anymore. Or you just go, okay, fine, well, I've got all that, but I'm still left with this symptom. If you treat it as a whole, you can then sort of work out what you need. And by having sort of the education that Andie was talking about, you can work out for yourself whether you want to give HRT a go or not. You may decide that for your long-term health, you think it is worth giving it a go. And as Andie said, you don't have to stay on it for more than 6 weeks if you don't want to. It's just educating people that HRT, it's not a one-size-fits-all. A lot of people don't really understand what it is. And a lot of people don't realise that if they've got a Milliner coil, for instance, they've already got the progesterone bit covered. They've already got part of their HRT. Once you realise that you may be taking part of it already with your contraception, it doesn't become such a scary concept because you realise that actually you're doing it anyway. Once you're educated, you're empowered to make your own choices.
Making your foundation solid in the first place, or just maintaining them, and general overall good health.
And this is it. Everything that we put in place benefits your health anyway.
For many women like ourselves, we believe we're eating pretty healthily anyway, and we've got all the macronutrients going in. But for some women, it's going to be more of an overhaul. How do you break it down into the small steps? So as you do with HRT or other decisions, how do you help them put the small steps in place so that they can then build on that?
If you go onto the internet and say, what should I do with my food during the perimenopause? You just come away going, oh, I can't do all that. That's ridiculous. Okay, because there's so much. And quite often we've got kids as well. And so we're trying to make one meal a day rather than 3 different ones because of 3 different life stages, which is why Fran creates a food plan that comes with shopping lists, that comes with tips and ideas within the live question and answer sessions about how you can tweak it if you've got a 5-year-old or 15-year-old in the house as well. And you can, to start with, you can literally just do what she says. Okay, not everyone wants to do it for the full 3 meals a day, but most people do it for at least one. And so you can just essentially do the step-by-step painting by numbers version. And then at the end, she then does some work with, okay, so now you come home from work and you're busy and you want to make a meal that follows these rules that you now understand because she's taught you the rules that essentially you're following. What are you going to make based on what's in the fridge? So she does a cooking session, sort of showing about what sort of meal you might make with cupboard staples that helps with that. How do you actually think? How do you create it yourself using the principles that she's taught you? So it's beyond a cookbook essentially because it's thinking it through in that slightly different way. And then alongside that, you've got the movement that's come in with a bit more of the strength work and again understanding why is it different than it used to be. Why is it that I've always been running and now someone's telling me I shouldn't run so much, or I should run but it's not the only thing, and I used to run and be trim and now I'm no longer trim. Understanding what's going on can be really helpful.
That all sounds terrific, particularly taking the thinking out of it and having it done for you to begin with. anything that does that, sign me up. Make life easier.
You know what we're like? I don't mind cooking. It's thinking about what to cook. That's the hard bit, isn't it?
Yeah, something to make it easier, simpler, to get everything that you need. Sounds absolutely terrific. So how can people find you, and when are your courses running?
So we're in the middle of one at the moment. You can find us via the website, which is changethechange.co.uk, Carol.
Yes.
And we've also got an Instagram page that will also take you as a link through. Because we've got a course on at the moment, the next one will be April time. But in addition to that, we do some corporate work as well. So we go into businesses, because there's a lot of courses out there for raising awareness of the menopause. But there's not a lot out there that says, let's actually try and make staff feel better in the menopause. So if it appeals for your business, then we may be able to help you, because there's a lot of expertise and experience in women in the workplace at this life stage. And being aware of that is great. We want to keep those skills going. So actually supporting and improving how people feel seems like a good way to keep people happy and functioning in the workplace.
I couldn't agree more.
Most life stages.
Thank you both so much for your time today. It has been such a pleasure meeting you.
All right, you take care.
Thanks, Patty. Bye.
You can find Andie, Carol, Francesca and Karen at changethechange.co.uk and on Instagram at change_the_change. I will leave all the information in the show notes. Please follow us on the podcast app so that you never miss an episode, and leave a review, as it does help boost our ratings. The more stories we get out there, the more people we support and help. Thank you for listening. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.